With Christian dating advice on YouTube, has anyone else noticed what they don't talk about? They do talk about dating, but rarely address how to even get started dating, which is important also. I've experienced the challenge with finding women to date. I've been searching for a wife for years and am yet to go on a first date. My brother is married, but before that, he too had years of searching. I'm not accusing Christian YouTubers of acting in bad faith, but while they've given us ample advice on what to do when dating, they don't tell us how to get into the dating process in the first place. Imagine if a company offered a job interview but didn't give the address where the interview is. That's kind of what this feels like. We young singles want to use dating advice, but we're stuck at the barrier of entry. Unfortunately, this is not a video with concrete answers on how to handle the problem. I too am still figuring this out, but hopefully this can spark some thinking in the minds of others to get even a little extra momentum toward a solution. Before I elaborate, just a few clarifications. One, I initially thought of doing a dating video years from now if I still hadn't found a wife. But I realized even if I did marry, I would still want to publicly address the issue on dating culture because it's so problematic. Two, this video is not me saying, I'm single, please date me. My channel is too small for that, and most who watch this are going to be well over 200 miles from where I live. And three, this is not a red pill video. I've heard some women are allegedly too picky or that they exploit divorce laws to swindle men's fortune, but I have never experienced such thing firsthand. In this video, I speak from my own experience. Take this with a grain of salt. Okay, those are my clarifications. Time to begin. First, let's make a distinction. I have heard online advice about traits to want in a potential spouse: single, opposite gender, equally yoked, etc. Lots of single Christians have thought through this and have an idea on the type of person they want to marry. But what this advice doesn't cover is how to find a person once you know the type you're looking for. Trying to find one person who fits every criterion feels like a needle in a haystack challenge, even when only factoring the critical fields. First, let's get a general idea of what percent of the population would meet basic criteria for dating. We don't need to factor language and geographic distance, as most people in one's local area speak the same language and obviously are close in distance. But we also consider the person's gender, which alone cuts the numbers in half. We can go further with the person's age, maybe 1 in 10 to fit that. They also need to be currently single. I don't know the numbers here, but an unfavored number here would seem to have a self-contradictory statement. That is, no one has a girlfriend because all the ladies are already taken. The more ladies there are already dating, the more that contradicts the initial statement of all the guys being single. Of course, the percentage of married people does increase with age. I don't know the exact number, but I'd guess 1 in 2 are single in their early mid-20s. Last, for rough calculations, let's talk about equally yoked. You might look at the religion demographics of the country for this, but that's less relevant because you can look specifically in church spaces because Christians gather there on the regular. Still, I would want somebody who is a true disciple of Christ, and not all churchgoers are saved. I won't try to guess how many are legit, and the number varies between churches. But for searching for a spouse, I want good confidence they're saved. Taking a shot from the hip, I would guess 1 in 5 fits this for me. Multiplying each category's rates together, we get 1 in 200. And that's before factoring other things a person might be seeking. What's their stance on having kids? Are they financially responsible? Do they have compatible life goals? It's harder to guess these, but if we assume another 1 in 2, we land at 1 in 400. If you search for a spouse specifically in the church, you could come across 400 people, and one of them might be your future spouse. And with the odds so intimidating, I hear platitudes about searching for a spouse. Trust in God, He has a plan, and He'll provide in His timing. While I agree with having faith that God provides His disciples with various blessings, I get a sense people in the church put a disproportionate amount of emphasis on this advice and forget other relevant behaviors. When I was a teen, my church had an event every 2 years that included physical challenges and camping in the woods. The students also learned some values about being a man. And first on that list was this: reject passivity. This teaching has stuck with me in my head as I've searched for a wife. Remember Genesis 2 that says a man leaves his parents to be united to his wife. If a guy is looking for a woman whom he'll marry and no longer depend so much on his parents, he should be a man at it. And that means rejecting passivity. I want to be proactive even before marriage. Genesis then gives another detail in the next chapter when the fall happens. When Eve sinned, her husband was there. Adam didn't stop Eve from eating the forbidden fruit, and their marriage wasn't the same after, with sin now having corrupted the couple's moral tendencies. Do you see? Adam's complacency interfered with his romance. As for me, in the present day, I don't want complacency interfering with my romantic pursuit. I remember the wisdom of James 2:15-17. If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and be filled," and yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? Even so, faith, if it has no works, is dead by itself. The church still shows faith through works in other areas, but for spouse searches, I'm suspicious. Are people subconsciously using the trust in God advice as an excuse? It's hard to improve conditions for young adults to socialize, but it's easy to tell them just to trust God. And we humans like taking the easy way out. But in other areas, we understand that when we want to improve something, we don't just tell it to God and do nothing. If someone is trying to, say, quit a bad drinking habit, yes, prayer is important, but we advise the person of physical-based actions, like joining an in-person support group and clearing their house of hard drinks. I see dating in a similar way. If we want to improve dating, it's not enough for us to just pray. Let's think how to change our environment to better encourage seeking. And let's remember that actions stem from having faith. I've thought of this in context with that estimate statistic from earlier. 1 in 400. That's a scary low rate. But I thought of 3 categories of thought. Imagine 3 thinkers, one for each mentality. The first is the wishful person. They think they should simply have faith in God and that actively searching for a spouse is a sign of a lack of faith. The second person has a sort of naturalist approach, not considering God's ability to work beyond as-is statistics. They might look at the numbers and conclude 1 in 400 is too infrequent and thus don't bother putting in the time to search. But then the third person is the person of active faith. They recognize the odds. They know God can overcome them, but also know that faith produces works. Therefore, unlike the wishful person, the active faith person doesn't see action as weakness. Instead, they see the act of searching as a sign of faith, for it is a signal that says, I know the odds are low, but I'm so confident in God's higher power that I'm willing to put in my own time despite the low odds. So yes, we should still put in effort beyond prayer, be that with recovering from a bad habit, dating, or something else. But what's the current state of the means to finding a spouse? I'm focusing more on the American contemporary church in this video, both because this church type is so common in my country, but also since it seems to have a higher percent of young adults. Consider what type of social gatherings take place at a given church. An event isn't social just by having lots of people in the same place, and in my experience, contemporary churches lack ease of socializing. It goes like this. There is one main part of the Sunday service, the sanctuary segment. Like in other churches, this segment includes singing and sermons. Singing includes people's voices, but they only say what's on the lyric board. Although songs can build unity within a church congregation, it's not a means for learning specifics about other people at that church. Sermons, similarly, do not teach you about your immediate peers at the church. It's not that singing and sermons need to be informative about your peers, but the point is, if you want to effectively learn about your peers at a church, you need something else in your church routine, something that stimulates two-way dialogue between church members. I've spent many Sunday mornings at other churches that provide this. I used to regularly attend a Mennonite church, and it was typical for the half hour after service dismissal for the congregation to hang around the sanctuary and openly converse with one another. That was fun. I got to learn a lot about the other men at that church because their habitual routine allowed a context for me to talk with them weekly. Another example beyond Mennonite circles is Sunday school classes where people talk through their own theological topics, potentially separate from the sermon and topics that the main congregation absorbs. Sunday school classes have another bonus where they're often categorized based on demographic. There are categories for age and gender, etc., that lets Sunday school classes teach lessons more relevant to individuals in the class without bloating the teachings for the overall congregation. A lesson on dating might not work very well for the main congregation, where most members are not in that season of life, but a lesson on dating fits well for, say, a young adult Sunday school class. More niche lessons in a Sunday school setting are also useful in a way for you to learn about other members in that same classroom. Two sets of parents in their early 30s have more to talk about than one of them talking with an elderly couple who has more focus on retirement management. Contemporary churches don't have as many Sunday school classes, but they do have something else: life groups. But those are basically Sunday school classes with a different label and sometimes take place on a different day of the week. In the latter case, that might make it harder to have the desire to attend because it's an extra commute to church. But even if there's another part of a Sunday morning schedule outside of the sanctuary segment, you still meet less people at a Sunday school or life group because some people show up just for the sanctuary segment. I admit I've done this at times that I've attended contemporary churches. In that type of church, it's too easy to slip in and out, interacting with few people. And that's a difficult thing for dating because many of the young adult Christians go to contemporary churches which don't cultivate more social interaction. And actually, just now, while recording the voiceover for this script, I've thought of something that people might be saying in response to this about, yeah, the churches might not cultivate the social interaction, but that doesn't stop a person from initiating that social interaction themselves. I sort of agree with this, but I only agree with it halfway. Because socialization is a two-party interaction. I can try to be social, but if the other people are not willing to be social, then the socialization does not happen. One other common church gathering is the youth group, but this group is for people in high school and below, which some in the church, including myself, believe teenagers should not be dating. Our culture likes to include teens in romance, but for others, the perspective is that teens should not be dating because they are years away from being ready for marriage. Even if you don't have a problem with teens dating, you can still understand that many start dating the one after they graduate, and that doesn't look too well with a fall off in church attendance in the post grad age group, as a lot of churchgoers leave the faith in early adult years or they go off to college. Many churches have programs for kids and teens. They also have programs for those 30 and up, but the young adult demographic feels underrepresented. But back up. What about college? There are some groups on college campuses for Christian students to meet. Could this be a place to find singles? I should put a disclaimer here. I did not go to college. There was a time I regularly attended a Christian group on a college campus, but I don't go anymore since I no longer consider myself in the college age group. Even for people who do go to college, a sizable portion of them only go for 4 years or less, and many Americans get married years after they complete college. But there's more problems. For one, 4 years of college does not mean 4 years of dating potential. When I entered college age, I still considered myself not prepared enough to date. Even if not for my past mental illness, I would have only felt ready for dating halfway through the college age range. And I especially have a problem with using college as a means of dating as someone who never went to college. College is expensive, so why should we rely on it for something like dating? Sure, the group I went to still let non-students attend, but because I wasn't a college student, I didn't hear about one of these Christian college gatherings until years after graduating high school. Lastly, consider whom you are meeting at college. Mostly other college students. Though not a hard deal breaker, some Christians did not go to college and prefer a spouse who didn't go either. There's a lot of financial baggage from student loan debt and association with poor career choices. And now, with what I've gone over, we can look at the broader picture and see young adults don't have many appealing options for finding a spouse. Even for the options they do have, the groups are typically for other pursuits. It's understandable that these groups are not primarily focused on romance, for even young adults have lots of other things they want to pursue in this season of life. However, it still means the romance solution is not as simple as going to these groups. When I go to one of these young adult groups, there's sometimes a feeling of eager anticipation, thinking, who am I going to meet tonight? For some transparency here, I will admit here, one of my big motivations for exploring these groups in churches is to search for a wife. One might consider the advice of having multiple reasons for attending a group, but the thing is, I can obtain multiple incentives easier by staying in the same group. I would like to have a group that feels more relatable with my pursuits even outside of marriage, and to properly be a part of a group means being a regular attendee. But remember the 1 in 400 number. To counter this, I want to cross paths with lots of people, and if you stay in one group, you'll get plenty of social exposure, but that's mostly with the same 10 or so people, a big contrast to the 1 in 400. So I explore multiple groups, but with my social attention spread thinner across those groups, I have less connection with any one of them, making it harder to hang around with any of them. So I go to a group, don't find anyone there that catches my interest, but I'm already there, so I sit through their discussion, which wasn't my reason for coming. I support reading the Bible, I do it every day, but with less connection to a given group, I sometimes get the feeling there was a better way to have spent my time. I could try to ask questions about the group to learn more about the members. Gender is typically clear just by visual observation, and they already talk about their theology since Bible topics often get talked about with church groups. But two things not immediately apparent are age and relationship status, which would be strange questions to ask about. Overall, churches don't feel effective for pairing singles, nor do Christian groups on college campuses. And society outside the church has a smaller percentage of believers. With the difficulty of these options, it's appealing to take a more direct approach and use technology. I originally drafted this essay without mentioning dating apps, but with how prevalent they are for young adults now, it felt in place to talk some about them. Since dating apps are used for, well, dating, it's socially comfortable to seek out information others users openly tell on their profile. Both men and women understand that the other is looking for a relationship, otherwise they wouldn't be on the app. No pressure to spend 20 minutes on Chatter. I agree with some people's criticism that dating apps can cause people to trivialize their talks with matches because of how many other people are available on the same app. But I do consider the automation to filter through basic fields very useful, filtering through fields like age, gender, proximity. But dating apps do still have their own problems, and like many other things in a capitalist economy, money is one of them. Those who own the dating apps gain income from users purchasing subscriptions to premium features, or at the least gathering user data and using that data for business purposes. This is typical with other social media accounts such as YouTube, but a site like YouTube, which is not primarily for dating, can do the job it presents itself, have users satisfied with the entertainment, and then later, those users come back for more. But dating apps are for helping people reach a hopefully once in a lifetime marriage. Users want to download the app, find a good match, get married, and then, for Christians, spend the rest of their lives together, meaning the rest of their lifetime not using the app. Dating apps are tasked with doing a job that, if done right, results in the app no longer having a job to do for that user, meaning less income. The saying applies here: a patient cured is a customer lost. And in this circumstance, the app loses double the customers because marriage is a two-person relationship. Considering the conflicting interests, I wouldn't want dating apps to be the go-to way for Christians to find love. I don't rule it out completely, but for preference, an ideal status quo is not to have for profit corporations being relied upon so much for helping young adults reach something as sacred as marriage. There is more I could say on this, but plenty of other people have already addressed dating apps. But I will say an observation of mine about the broader internet. At some point in the last few decades, society has crossed a tipping point. The standard way of socializing used to be in person events, but the social transition to media platforms made it harder to socialize in the old fashioned way. A Gen Z person might try to be social in person, but now that a huge chunk of the population often interacts through digital spaces, it's harder to find people available in person. We like to talk about third places disappearing, and I agree we should have more third places, but it's not enough to change infrastructure. When a person wants social interaction, it makes sense to go where lots of people are, which has increasingly been online spaces. Therefore, the people go to these online spaces, adding themselves to the statistic of the digital population. Social media usership is self-sustaining. Last for this video, I want to talk about social pressure with how the meeting process goes. Obviously, we want to fight back against the loneliness epidemic. Our culture talks about that. But I see other conflicting desires in our same culture. Though we want to meet new people, we also have a fear of how that'll come off to others. It feels weird to have someone you hardly know approach you and start asking questions, but that's exactly how we meet new people, and yet we're overlooking the opportunity. Why is it awkward or maybe even creepy to have a stranger engage in casual talk? How many times have we been told, mind your own business or some variant? How do you expect young adults to find dates in their age range if they're told, don't ask a woman for her age? I'm not demanding people reveal their deep secrets, but I'm asking to learn somewhat more about people. Imagine if learning about your peers was charted on a scale. On one end, you have minimal knowledge of the other person, and on the other, you know highly personal details. As I just said, I don't need to know highly personal details. But let's look at the low end of the scale. If I'm honest with myself, I don't feel much anxiety about learning simple things about people. But we also want some friendships beyond simple association, and our culture doesn't do that very well. I think back to those icebreaker games people sometimes play. They share information about themselves, but the questions are trivial. Questions like, what is your favorite color? What am I supposed to use that information for? Why not ask some better questions? Job occupation is an easy one to open with and is more relevant to that person while also giving more hints as to the type of person they are. This goes beyond romance too. I want a wife, but I also want other friends outside my biological family that I enjoy spending quality time with. And if we want more meaningful relationships, we should ask deeper questions. Back to that scale, I ask, are we willing to go some more toward the deeper questions? Not as far as to push the other end of the scale, but still somewhat deeper? And I imagine someone's gonna watch this and think, I don't know. I don't feel comfortable asking those questions. And what if the other person isn't comfortable with being asked? I get the hesitation, but also remember, the loneliness epidemic is no small problem. So perhaps solving that problem means doing something uncomfortable. If we don't risk putting ourselves in socially awkward situations, in a way, we keep the peace, but at what cost? Something happened to me recently where I visited a life group at a church I don't usually attend. I thought it was a young adult group and I was looking to put myself out there in case I encountered a nice single lady. But some time into visiting there, someone pulled me aside and asked me some background questions. Later in the talk, this guy explained, I might have been the youngest person in that group that night. It turns out that 20 plus age range listed on the life group list on the church website, that was actually inaccurate. But also, because no one knew I was coming, The two leaders of the group got caught off guard and felt uncomfortable. The guy I was talking to was understanding, and my arrival wasn't on my conscience. I had gone to other life groups where this sort of discomfort didn't happen. That evening was hard on me, and I didn't want the leaders to feel the way they did. However, going to a group I was unfamiliar with, that's how you meet new people. There have been times in my life where later I look back and cringe inside about what I did or said in the past, and maybe that's been keeping me from making some social moves. But more recently, I've been asking myself a question. If I keep being so passive with looking for a wife, would I find one? If I'm passive and keep going to only the same social groups I've known for years, I risk never getting married. Yes, I am scared about making myself look silly, but the evening at that life group felt different. Perhaps the way I felt was awkward but not embarrassed. Before that evening happened, I had dwelled on the thought. For for one area of socialization, I feel like I'm at the end of my rope. I don't want fear of the awkward to stop me from finding a wife. I want to be proactive, join social settings, and if I appear awkward, that is a risk I'm willing to bear if it means increasing my odds of finding that special partner. I would rather be awkward than single. So if culture has social barriers in the way, I still respect some of those barriers, but please understand what's at stake here. Not just for me, but for widespread society. We share a common desire to fight loneliness, and that involves taking the courage to do what's uncomfortable. And I want to be one of those courageous people. Remember, the odds for each person met are 1 in 400, and we don't stay young forever. Living in social fear has too high a cost for a world with limited time. Reject passivity.